Chapter 14, Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, and Russian Jewry. The professional communist is neither a sheep nor a dupe. He knows precisely and exactly what he is doing and why. His goal is power. Total, relentless, invulnerable, and irreversible power. The communist has a highly developed ability to carry out party objectives while behaving like a non-communist in the midst of anti-communists. The practice of deception becomes so much of a pattern of his behavior that he will use deceptive methods even when it is unnecessary. It becomes a way of life. Herbert A. Philbrick. First we will take Eastern Europe, then the masses of Asia. Then we will surround America, the last citadel of capitalism. We shall not have to attack. She will fall into our lap like an overripe fruit. Vladimir Lenin, 1870 to 1924. The Torah opposes socialism because it was not given to angels but to material beings. Judah D. Eisenstein, 1854 to 1956, in his Ozar Yisrael, an encyclopedia of all matters concerning Jews and Judaism. Until 1722, the power of the czars of Russia depended on the feudal system over which they presided, governed by a small noble class that owned the land and the peasant serfs. In 1722, Peter the Great instituted a major reform in Russia, a civil service career ladder system which established 14 ranks of nobility. Prior to this time, only the hereditary nobility ruled. The new system, for the first time, created a nobility called chinovniki, chin meaning rank or rung of a ladder. These lifetime bureaucrats laid the foundations for Russian capitalism. One outstanding chinovnik, Count S.Y. Witt, 1849 to 1915, began as a railroad manager and became Minister of Finance. He put Russia on the gold standard, started banks, got foreign investments, and initiated the Trans-Siberian Express. While a social contradiction existed between the feudal state privileges of Tsarism and bourgeoisie free enterprise, the Chinovnik-Tsarist coalition made huge strides during the 19th century development of Russia. Tsar Alexander II freed the serfs in 1861, the same year the U.S. began the Civil War. This ensured the loyalty of Russia's army, which was 90% serf, to Tsarism. During the last decade of the 19th century, Russia's steel industry grew 116%, in contrast to England's 80% and the United States of America's 63%, and its oil by 179%, second only to the United States. The capitalistic prosperity of Russia and the Chinovnik-Tsarist coalition ensured that Illuminati-backed revolutions of a Decabrist variety would be doomed to fail. The very fact that Russia survived the destitution of the 1854 to 1856 Crimean War defeat, with its famine and hardships, was in a sense a victory for free enterprise. The communists, however, capitalized on the destitution of the war and attributed it to a feudal state. This term, which began to gain widespread use, has since been used freely by collectivist intellectuals to describe any non-socialist communist system that they wanted changed. The monopoly capitalist conspirators of the Illuminati power structure worked diligently and incessantly during the 19th century to build and to back a revolutionary socialist peasant uprising, ranging from Narodnik Alexander Herzen to the son of a Greek Orthodox priest, N.G. Triniszewski, 1838 to 1889, to that of the Zemla i Volya, or Land and Freedom movement, the first underground revolutionary movement of 1862, through to its two unofficial factions that were led by P.C. Lavrov, 1823 to 1900, and Mikhail Bakunin, 1814 to 1876. These movements failed, for after the mad summer uprisings of 1874, catalyzed by them, and mass arrests, the peasants reaffirmed their allegiance to the Tsar. During the 19th century, the Jews of Russia constantly experienced anti-Semitic policies under the various Tsarist regimes, however in varying degrees of intensity depending on who was Tsar. Alexander I ruled from 1801 to 1825. He encouraged Jewish mercantilism in Russia by imposition of a tax that enabled Jews to establish urban residence, from which all Jews had been previously barred. Alexander I attempted to herd Jews into fixed areas and regulate their activities, attempting to destroy their autonomous status in rural Russia as middlemen, landlords, innkeepers, farmers, and producers of agricultural byproducts such as liquor. The Napoleonic War interrupted his Jewish program, which was reinstated in 1815, with one major change. Russia became known as a Christian country and granted status to Jews on condition of conversion to Christianity. The Jews were ostracized from border communities where they had developed lucrative trades as inter-country export and import middlemen, and from farm communities to reduce the influence in Russia's agrarian sector. Nicholas I, who ruled from 1825 to 1855, was a cruel oppressor of the Jews and completely ostracized Jews from any government positions or activities, replacing them with Christians. Despite Alexander's prior policy of ostracism of Jews from the border communities, there were Jews who, through bribery, had managed to remain there. These Nicholas forcibly exiled to designated areas. Those urbanized Jews who had paid the tax to reside in Russia's large cities were likewise expelled. Nicholas's other activities with respect to the Jews were discussed in Chapter 5. They included the forced conscription of 12-year-olds into the army, which they formally entered at age 18 for 25 years, preceded by 6 years of forced indoctrination into Christianity. The only respite Nicholas gave the Jews was to allow some 30,000 of them to settle government-regulated agricultural colonies, many bearing Hebrew names and subsidized by the government. The cruelties of Nicholas were a source of public protest by Jews of other countries. Alexander II ruled from 1855 to 1881 and was more tolerant to the Jews than his two predecessors. He abolished the cruel forced conscription of Jews. He reopened urban Russia to Jewish settlement, again for a fee, of course, and allowed Jewish students to enroll in government schools. His initial policies were intended to assimilate Jews into the Russian culture by being good to them rather than cruel. However, Jewish participation in the ill-fated Polish revolt against Russian rule in 1861 soured him on the Jews. Accordingly, he reinstituted economic sanctions against them, culminating in the Odessa pogrom of 1871, in which the government policy was hands-off to the massacre. During this period, however, a new Jewish intelligentsia arose that was articulate in its mastery of Hebrew scholarship and Jewish law, and which, unlike the secular Haskalah enlighteners, had strong religious values. This intelligentsia supported both financially and intellectually, as well as by literary contributions, a wide array of new Hebrew periodicals and newspapers, unfortunately largely dominated by the secular Haskalah movement, but which nevertheless displayed a healthy love for the reestablishment of a Jewish homeland. These outstanding publications were Ha-Majid, Ha-Mailitz, Ha-Zafira, and Ha-Carmel. Simultaneously, a whole new Yeshiva Renaissance movement manifested itself, spearheaded by the disciples of Elijah, Gaon of Vilna, Lithuania, 1720 to 1797. Great new Torah personalities thrived who illuminated this generation and trained thousands of disciples who were a vital spiritual force in breathing new life and vitality into Russian Jewry. Among these outstanding personalities were Rabbis Chaim Volozhin, Naftali Zevi, Yehuda Berlin, Yisrael Salanter, Isaac Elkanan Spector, and Raphael Shapiro. These rabbis were not only great scholars of saintly character and revered ecclesiastical authorities, but were militant foes of communism and Illuministic Haskalah and waged active war against them. On March 13, 1881, a bomb terminated the life of Alexander II. The assassination of the Tsar was accomplished by the Narodvoltsi terrorists, a small group consisting of no more than 50 people. These terrorists were disciples of Bakunin and P.N. Kachev, 1844 to 1886. What is most significant here is that Kachev publicly advocated Illuministic Jacobinism in his journal, Nahat. together with S.G. Nechayev, 1847 to 1882, co-author with Bakunin on the Revolutionary Catechism. They both advocated conspiratorial revolution by a militant terrorist minority. There were assassination attempts on the Tsar in 1863 and a close call in 1866. Franco Venturi, in his Roots of Revolution, documents the fact that many student terrorists of 1863 confessed to being disciples of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati. Nechayev died in prison the same year his co-conspiratorial terrorist Kaltorin, 1856 to 1882, was sent to the gallows. By 1884, the back of the Narodvoltsi was broken as a result of arrests, exiles, and executions. All this took place under the cruel reign of Tsar Alexander III. Alexander III, however, was determined to make Russia uninhabitable to Jews, and so, at his instigation, a series of pogroms and persecutions were initiated. The 1881 pogroms that were initiated on May 11, 1881, took their toll on the thousands of Jews who were killed, maimed, raped, and robbed. Approximately 20,000 Jews were left homeless and 100,000 were impoverished. The property damage was estimated at $80 million in the American gold-backed currency of that era. To prevent the true extent of the destruction from becoming known to the civilized world, the Tsar imposed strict censorship on media and private correspondence. However, the genius of Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Spector, Rabbi of Kovno, leading religious decisor of his generation, succeeded in penetrating the censorship, writing many letters to rabbis all over the world on what appeared to be routine matters, but in reality was rabbinic code detailing the extent of the destruction. His letters were a vital catalyst in organizing financial aid from Jews throughout the diaspora for the pogrom victims. Contrary to popular opinion, the Narodny and fellow socialist travelers of the period were not the champions of the Jews in their time of despair, for on the issue of persecuting Jews, they were on the side of the Tsar. And so it was that the Narodnik press justified the pogrom as, for example, they're stating on August 30th, 1881, the pogroms against the Kikes are to be praised. Professor Mordecai Walensky, Soviet Jewry Lectures, Hebrew College, Boston. The party line then was that the masses are reacting to Jewish exploitation. A latter faction, formed in 1879 of the Zemla Evolia, the Narodnaya Volia, or NV, which was the people's will, of which the Narodvoltsi were its terrorists, stated bluntly that the Kikes have seized control and are the peasants' curse. This view was shared by NV member Sofia Perovskaya, 1853 to 1881, whose anti-Semitism matched that of her Tsarist general father and her lower-class aforementioned NV comrade, S.N. Kalturin, whom the Tsar had hanged for terrorism. The official line in the Soviet Union towards the pogroms was no different. Soviet propagandist Vladimir Begin in 1974 stated that the pogroms were justified because of Jewish exploitation. Similar remarks issued from other propagandists. As Marx and Engels observed these events unfolding before them, they added a preface of Plekhanov's 1882 Russian edition of the manifesto, which read, "We say that Russia today forms the vanguard of revolutionary action in Europe, and what happens on and to the land may serve as the starting point for a communist development." Thus, Marx and Engels drew the blueprint for the communist revolution as a bourgeoisie revolution, since capitalism and industrialization ended land-based or agrarian socialism. Around that time, there was a serious Marxist student at St. Petersburg University, Alexander Lenin, nicknamed Sasha, who was absorbing Marxism in large doses. He had completed a Russian translation of Marxist critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. In 1886, the year his father died, he won a gold medal for his original zoological research. Some months later, he formed a new Narodnaya Volia terrorist section to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. They did not succeed. Having discovered the plot by accident, the authorities arrested, tried, and hanged him and 4 comrades on May 8, 1887. His brother Vladimir, later to become the first ruler of the Bolshevik Soviet Union, was shocked. However, he worshipped his older brother and decided to study Marxism and avenge his brother's death. In August 1887, Lenin entered Kazan University to study law. On December 4th, 1887, he was expelled for participating in a student demonstration. It is amazing that Lenin was admitted in the first place to Kazan, since subsequent to the attempted assassination of Alexander III, Lenin's family were social outcasts. It was only through the intervention of a former headmaster of Lenin that he even got admitted. That headmaster was none other than Fyodor Kerensky, the hero of the February Revolution of 1917 that overthrew the Tsar. True to communist form, Lenin repaid the favor and ousted his Menshevik mentor and master from office in October of 1917. Kerensky's taking Lenin under his wing was no historical coincidence. Kerensky was a member of an Illuminist group that had subverted, or perhaps more appropriate, expropriated a Masonic organization. Lenin began his public activity in 1894. The following year, Nicholas II became Tsar, and in December of 1895 he had Lenin arrested and exiled to Siberia. Now, several events beginning with Lenin's emergence into public activity in 1894 up until the October Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 occurred, which a student of history might find confusing. There was infighting on various issues. Should the revolution be bourgeoisie or proletariat, violent or nonviolent, political or through economic trade unions? Can capitalism be gradually reformed, as Marxist Edward Bernstein, 1850 to 1932, suggested, under the name of revisionism? And who should be in the party? Who should not? Should the party seek to unite all types of socialists or be selective? All this infighting was a repetition of Karl Marx's jockeying for power, except now it was Lenin's turn, for Lenin was a tool of the Illuminati monopoly capitalists. This meant that ultimately, just like the sincere working man's representative Weitling had been ousted from the Communist Party by Marx, the sincere, uncontrolled Martov, born Julius Sederbaum, 1873 to 1923, leader of the Jewish Socialist Workers' Bund, who engineered a 15,000 Bundist workers' strike, and others like him, would have to be ousted from power. At the Second Congress, 1903, of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, RSDLP, Lenin made an unsuccessful power play at the 22nd session and was outvoted 28 to 23. The issue? A broad-based, flexible party, championed by Martov, or a tightly run organization in which backward elements would be excluded, championed by Lenin. Now, utilizing the ingrained anti-Semitism of the enlightened Social Democrats, Lenin succeeded at the 27th session of the Congress to get a 41 to 10 vote that the Bundists could not remain autonomous. At that point, the Bundists walked out, but not Martov. Subsequently, Lenin tried to consolidate his power further through his hand-picked boys, who were part of an underground newspaper network he had started called Iskra. Even though Martov had contributed 39 articles to Lenin's 32 in the 45 issues that had come out, Martov was not one of Lenin's boys. The result was another 9 bitter sessions, with Lenin winning by narrow majorities on the issues. Now, Bolshevik means majority, and Menshevik means minority, and these titles stuck to these factions. So after the Congress was over, these groups went their separate ways. Ironically, though, Lenin's Bolsheviks controlled the distribution network of Iskra. The Mensheviks controlled the actual publication of the paper. So, in December 1904, Lenin founded a new newspaper, Vepryod, utilizing the Iskra network. Lenin was a pioneer at establishing a media network, and monopoly capitalist illuminist money assured its success. From 1905, a period of great national unrest, intrigue, and counter-intrigue afflicted Russia. The secret police infiltrated trade unions and even succeeded in controlling them. They also infiltrated the Bolsheviks. Meanwhile, Lenin was jockeying for more power so that by April 1905, the Third Congress of the RSDLP was called the Bolshevik Third Congress. One could further subcategorize both the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks as either sincere and or agent tools of Illuminati monopoly capitalists. Bearing this in mind, we can lay down certain principles which applied to this and many other Illuminati-agitated revolutions. Of the six, the first is the Illuminati monopoly capitalist or IMC agents could never ultimately tolerate sincere idealists and would strive to eliminate them from positions of power at any cost, like Marx and Weitling, Lenin and Martov. Two, individual Illuminati power spheres were engaged in a power struggle to consolidate their positions in the forthcoming revolution and place their bets on who they thought would win, like Rothschilds versus Rockefellers. Three, the primary motivating factor of an IMC agent was not his ideology, but personal ambition. The IMC agent was then and is now a power-hungry criminal, ruthless and materialistic, a worshiper at the altar of the idol's success, like Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky. 4. The IMC agent would dump one ideology for another instantly if he could gain in a power play for control of the revolution, like Leon Trotsky, who switched from Menshevik to Bolshevik. 5. The IMC power sphere would have as its reward a captive market, the totalitarian socialist state. In effect, there is one purchasing agent in contradistinction to thousands in a free enterprise economy, like, for example, Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan, Westinghouse, Ford Motors, and Occidental Petroleum business with the USSR. And 6, it was essential that the IMC alliances with communism be hidden from public scrutiny and that an accepted conceptual spectrum of political left and right be foisted on the public, like obfuscation of Nazi or being National Socialism or low profile of Rockefeller and Ford Foundation grants to communist organizations and personalities. Now, the IMC and their communist counterparts had and have much in common. What they share as goals are collectivism, a totalitarian society, monopoly control of society, centralized political control, individual coercion, abandonment of Noahide laws of universal morality, contempt for ethnicity, contempt for authentic, absolute moral theology religions, especially Judaism, the mother of Western religions, absolute political power, a welfare state, central banking, exploitation of the public good and public interest to their own ends, and contempt for laissez-faire entrepreneurs. The aforementioned principles are by no means my original idea. They have been articulated by astute political scientists, historians, and other distinguished intellectuals. Among those who have documented the factuality of most or all of these principles include Professor Anthony Sutton, author of Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution and Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, Professor Carroll Quigley, 1910 to 1977 of Georgetown, Princeton, and Harvard, author of Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment, Dr. M. Cleon Skousen, former Chief of Police, Salt Lake City, and president of the Freeman Institute, author of The Naked Capitalist and The Naked Communist, Gary Allen, author of the bestseller None Dare Call It a Conspiracy, Andrew J. Melichinsky, president of Constitutional Revival, lecturer and author of numerous essays, pamphlets, bulletins, and broadsides exposing the evils of socialism, as well as producer of videos, Taylor Caldwell, prominent author whose novel Captains and Kings especially focuses on these matters, Professor Paul Eidelberg of Bar-Ilan University, distinguished political scientist, lecturer, author, and columnist, Joel Boehnerman, internationally acclaimed author and editor of Inside Israel, and Barry Charnish, noted investigative reporter, columnist, and author of several books, including Traders and Carpetbaggers in the Promised Land and Who Murdered Yitzhak Rabin, the Hebrew version of what became #1 on Israel's bestseller list. A revolution was averted in 1905 by the Tsar conceding to form a Duma with a constitution. This caught the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks off guard. Initially, they had bad-mouthed it, but when they saw that they could achieve power, they ran for office in it. On April 3, 1917, Lenin arrived in Russia. That evening, Lenin proclaimed, "We don't need bourgeoisie democracy. All power to the Soviets." On April 4th, Lenin delivered his April thesis containing 8 sections that, among other things, advocated confiscation of all landed estates, nationalization of all lands in the country, production and distribution of products under the control of the Soviets, cessation of the imperialist world war, and amalgamation of all banks in the country into a single national bank. The last point was most important to the IMC. When Lenin later nationalized the banks, he exempted only one bank, Citibank's predecessor, National City Bank, because of its role in the revolution. In March 1918, J.A. Stillman replaced his late father as the bank president. J.A.'s daughter Isabel was the wife of Percy A. Rockefeller, John D.'s son. On April 8, 1917, the Petersburg Bolshevik Committee rejected Lenin's April thesis by a vote of 13-2. However, the Bolsheviks underestimated Lenin, or perhaps more accurately, the Wall Street IMC coalition behind Lenin, for in July of 1917, party members had expanded from 24,000 in April to 240,000 in July. The new membership was totally loyal to Lenin. Shortly after Lenin came to power in 1917, he established a Jewish affairs section in the Communist Party, manned by the self-identity-hating Jews called the Yevoskaja, and they tried to bring the Bolshevik idea into action by abolishing the practices of Judaism, and their goal was to impose the proletarian dictatorship among the Jewish masses. They used voodoo methods to strike out Judaism whenever it was possible. They had a reign of terror upon Jewish communities, synagogues, rabbinical seminaries, and elementary and intermediate schools where the Torah was taught. Libraries were confiscated and holy books burned. They were willing to support a Yiddish press that would propagandize communism among the Jews in Russia, but they would not allow any continuation of Torah observance and would stop at nothing to prevent it. Religious education was prohibited. Synagogues and other Jewish institutions that were seized were converted into clubs, workshops, and warehouses. Taxes were levied against rabbis and other religious leaders to force them to leave their positions. The demands for the freedom of religion promised by the revolution were met with mockery and punishment. Lenin, however, would not tolerate the mistreatment of secular Jews, even after Fanya Kaplan, a Jew, failed to assassinate him. Many rabbis, such as the late Lubavitcher Rebbe's father-in-law and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, were jailed and served long sentences. The two were freed due to the intervention of a senator from Idaho, William Edgar Bora. The senator was asked by his fellow congressman, "Why are you doing this? You have no Jewish constituents in Idaho." His answer was, "When the day comes that I meet the good Lord, my Maker, and he asks me what I did in my life for the Lord, I will point out simply that deed, and I have no fear of damnation." That is according to Rabbi Samuel Fishbane, commenting on Rabbi Moshe in Art Scroll 1998, page 49.